Hey everyone, Mitch coming in for the Commander Score Studio. Welcome to the show. So, on today's episode, we've got an Omega level commander. Now, what exactly is an Omega level commander? Well, it's a commander that is an incredibly powerful commander that is a massive threat. And the Omega level commander for today's deck tech is Urza, Lord Protector. Urza is a 2/4 human artificer for 1 white and a blue that has artifact, instant, and sorcery spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. And by paying 7, if you both own and control Urza Lord Protector and an artifact named the Mightstone and Weakstone, exile them, then meld them into Urza Planeswalker, activate only as a sorcery. Now, on my deck text, for every single card in the 99, they need to be less than $1, and unfortunately, the Mightstone and Weakstone is nowhere near $1, so we cannot use it in this deck, and we cannot meld our commander. Regardless, this commander is incredibly powerful, even without that. Urza is a very low-to-the-ground commander that can reduce the cost of some fantastic spells, and being able to reduce the cost of artifacts, instants, and sorceries is ridiculous. Especially when it comes to artifacts, yeah, we can do some very crazy things, and yeah, a lot of artifacts that we have can be either cast for free or at a greatly reduced cost, and in combination with other things can be very, very free, and we can do some very powerful and deadly things. So yeah, Urza really doesn't need that ability to be considered an Omega level threat. And although Urza is a very expensive card itself, around $24, the rest of the cards in the deck, again, are very budget-friendly at less than $1, so they help knock down the overall price of the deck to make it more budget-friendly. And of course, on this episode, like my other deck techs, I'm going to be taking you through different tactics to show you how this deck works and how we're going to win with it. And one more thing, if you are interested in this deck, make sure you check out that deck list link in the description below. And now with all that said, let's jump into it. First up, there's Wayfarer's Bauble, which you can pay 2 to tap and sacrifice to get a basic land into play tapped. And again, with our commander, keep in mind, if our commander's already in play, this is free. Next up, we've got some mana rocks that can be at a fantastic reduced cost with our commander with Arcane Signet, Felwar Stone, and Azorius Signet. Arcane Signet can tap for either of our colors, Felwar Stone can do so most of the time, and Azorius Signet can help us filter our mana into its guild's colors. And then we've got Marble Diamond and Sky Diamond, which each enter the battlefield tapped and can tap for one of our 2 colors, and Star Compass also enters the battlefield tapped and can tap for either of our colors depending on our land situation. Moving on, there's Prismatic Lens, which can tap for a color so we can filter mana with it, Mind Stone, which can also tap for a color so we can pay 1 to tap and sacrifice to draw a card, or Liquid Metal Torque, which can also tap for a color so we can make target non-land permanent artifact until end of turn. And then we do have some other mana rocks that can tap for a colorless but enter the battlefield tap with Guardian Idol, Ebony Fly, and Obsidian Obelisk. Guardian Idol can also become a 2/2 until end of turn. Ebony Fly can become, well, a fly that has flying and gives something else flying. And Obsidian Obelisk, well, can be tapped to add 1 mana of any color for a multicolored spell. Again, like I mentioned, Urza's cost reduction can be incredible for these mana rocks, again, making them each cost 1. But of course, we have some even bigger mana rocks with some even bigger effects that Urza can help out with too. So next up, we've got Coalition Relic, which can tap to add 1 mana of any color, or we can tap to put a charge counter on it to basically store that mana. So yeah, this can essentially add 2 mana in a single turn. Speaking of which, there's Warden Power Stone, which costs 3, enters the battlefield tapped, it can tap for 2, and then Sisay's Ring enters the battlefield untapped and taps for 2 as well. Speaking of which, there's Hedron Archive, which does the exact same thing, but we can also pay 2 to tap and sacrifice it to draw 2 cards. And then Stone Speaker Crystal is the exact same thing, but we can pay 2 to tap and sacrifice it to exile any number of target players' graveyards and draw a card. Whereas Everflowing Chalice is a very flexible mana rock. It's got multi-kicker too, and it's going to enter the battlefield with a charge counter on it for each time it was kicked, and then it can tap for that much. Moving on, we've got Midnight Clock, which can tap for a blue, or we can pay 2 and a blue to put an hour counter on it, and at the beginning of each upkeep, we get an hour counter on it. Once that 12th hour counter is put on it, we shuffle our hand and graveyard into our library and draw 7 cards and exile Midnight Clock. So this can be a great way to refuel our hand, and speaking of refueling, well, we also have Dramatic Reversal, which is going to untap all non-lane permanents we control, so we can tap all our artifacts for a lot of value and a lot of mana, and then we untap them and do it again. And speaking of value, of course, outside of Urza, we've got other ways to make our spells cost even less with Ethereum Sculptor, Foundry Inspector, and Jor's Familiar. Ethereum Sculptor and Foundry Inspector are both going to make our artifact spells cost 1 less to cast, so in combination with our commander, yeah, these can make a lot of our artifacts free to actually play. And then Jor's Familiar is going to count historic spells, so of course that also counts artifacts, legendaries, and sagas. But yeah, the most important of those being artifacts, And again, this cost reduction can get incredibly crazy throughout the game. And speaking of crazy, we are going to be running a lot of artifacts that are very low to the ground and can provide us a lot of value thanks to our cost reduction. Conjurer's Bauble is definitely one of them. It can tap and sacrifice it to put up to 1 target card from our graveyard on the bottom of our library. Now, we don't have to do that. The more important part is draw a card. So with our commander, this is a free cantrip essentially. Again, that cost is reduced to 0. We can just play this, sacrifice it, draw a card. And of course, there are other ways to take advantage of this card as well. Moving on though, we've got Lantern of the Lost, which enters the battlefield. We can exile target card from a graveyard, and by paying 1, we can tap to exile it and all cards from graveyards and draw a card. Next up, there's Terrarian, which enters the battlefield tapped. We can pay 2 to tap and sacrifice that 2 mana and then a combination of colors, and when it's put into a grave from the battlefield, we draw a card. So again, essentially a free cantrip for us. Moving on, we've got some other artifacts that, again, aren't going to be free with our commander, but will be completely free if we've got something else in play, again, like an Ethereum Sculptor. Regardless, 1 mana for these is still going to be incredible. So let's talk about Alchemist Vial, Elsewhere Flask, and Golden Egg. Each of these has, when they enter the battlefield, draw a card. On top of that, Alchemist Vial can be sacrificed to make target creature not be able to attack or block this turn. Elsewhere Flask can be sacrificed, and we choose a basic land type, and each land we control becomes that type until end of turn. And then Golden Egg can be sacrificed at 1 mana of any color or to gain life. And of course, we've got plenty of other cantripping artifacts where those came from, so we're also running Guild Globe, Ichor Wellspring, and Prophetic Prism. Again, each of these are going to draw us a card when they come into play. Guild Globe also is going to add 2 mana of different colors if we sacrifice it. Ichor Wellspring, if when it's put in a graveyard, we also draw a card, and Prophetic Prism can help us filter our mana. And then there's Sleeper Dart, Spare Supplies, and Wedding Invitation, which, you guessed it, draw us a card when they come into play. Sleeper Dart can be sacrificed to make target creature not untapped during its controller's next untap step. Spirit Supplies enters the battlefield tapped, and we can also sacrifice it to draw another card, and then Wedding Invitation can be sacrificed and target creature can be blocked this turn. Next up, we've got Energy Refractor, a brand new card. Enters the battlefield, we draw a card, and we can pay 2 to add 1 mana of any color, so it's a great way for us to filter mana. And then Eye of Vecna is going to draw us a card and have us lose 2 life when it comes into play, but on top of that, at the beginning of our upkeep, we can pay 2, and if we do, we draw a card and lose 2 life. Now, you might think we're done with getting cards, but we are nowhere near done with that just yet. So we're also going to be running Artificer Assistant, which has, whenever you cast a historic spell, scry 1. And again, keep in mind, artifacts are historic, so this can help us dig through our deck very quickly and help us with some fantastic card selection. Speaking of which, there's Riddlesmith, which says whenever you cast an artifact spell, you may draw a card. If you do, discard a card, so a fantastic looting effect for us throughout the game. And then Future Sight says play the top card of your library revealed. You may play the top card of your library. And yeah, again, this deck can churn through cards in absolutely no time, so being able to cast cards to the top of our library is pretty incredible. Especially, again, thanks to our commander's cost reduction and potentially additional cost reduction from other things as well to help us cast spell after spell after spell for free. Now, a card that is not going to be free, but next to free, is Thoughtcast. Affinity for artifacts, draw 2 cards, so yeah, we can very easily cast this for a single mana. And then Universal Surveillance has Improvise, so our artifacts can help cast it as well. I mean, even though those artifacts aren't tapping for mana themselves, any of our artifacts can help out essentially for 1 mana apiece, draw X cards. And also helping for 1 again, keep in mind, is our commander, which reduces the cost of instants and sorceries. So, of course, it can also reduce the cost of Paradoxical Outcome, which is going to return any never target non-land, non-token permanents we control back to their hands. Draw a card for each card, return to your hand this way. This can be a massive play. Again, we can just dump out a ton of artifacts very quickly into play. By casting this, we bring them all back, draw even more cards to dump even more artifacts into play. And speaking of bringing things back, well, we're also going to be running Geistway, which can bounce target non-land permanent to its owner's hand, and if we control that permanent, we draw a card. In a somewhat similar way, there's Into the Royal, which we can kick for 1 in a blue, and we bounce target non-land permanent back to its owner's hand. If it was kicked, we draw a card. And then Oblation's going to make the owner of target non-land permanent shuffle into their library and draw 2 cards. And again, as I should mention again with all these, keep in mind our commander reduces the cost of our spells. So 2 mana for Oblation is pretty fantastic, especially, if we're targeting one of our own things to draw some cards. Next up, how about Aether Spellbond, which we can sacrifice to bounce a creature back to its owner's hand or draw a card. And then Brawl's Expertise is going to bounce 3 target artifacts and our creatures back to their owner's hands. And again, we can target our own if we want to, and we can cast a card with converted mana cost 4 or less from our hand without paying its mana cost. Aether Gale is somewhat similar to this. Return 6 target non-land permanents back to their hands, so yeah, we can bounce our opponent's things if we need to, or our own if we want to get their ETBs or cast triggers again. So we also have some other ways to mass bounce plenty of things, including artifacts, obviously, with Displacement Wave, Rebuild, and Reduce to Dreams. Displacement Wave is going to bounce all non-land permanents converted mana cost 2 or less back to their owner's hands. Rebuild is going to bounce all artifacts back to their hands, or we can cycle it away, and Reduce to Dreams is going to bounce all artifacts and enchantments back to their owner's hands. So yeah, these can give us a massive opportunity to replay a ton of our artifacts for a lot of value. Now, as good as all these cards are, in my opinion, there is one card in the 99 that stands above the rest, and that is the Golden Pig of this deck. And the Golden Pig of this deck is Temporal Fissure. Temporal Fissure is a sorcery for 4 and a blue, but again, keep in mind our commander reduces that cost by 1. Anyways, return target permanent to its owner's hand and Storm. So because of Storm, when you cast a spell copied for each spell cast before it this turn, you may choose 2 targets for the copies. Again, we can cast an absurd amount of spells in a single turn, again thanks to our commander's cost reduction, and potentially even more cost reduction from other cards as well. But yeah, when we are casting a ton of artifacts, again many of them for free, bouncing them back to our hand, casting them again for free, we can get that Storm count up to an absurd amount. Then we cast this, and well, we can go in one of 2 directions. First up, obviously this can be a great way to bounce our own permanents back to our hand so that we can again get more value out of them and recast them for, again, those ETBs or cast triggers, etc, etc. But also this can be an incredible finisher for us because, yeah, we can essentially at a certain point probably bounce every single permanent that matters to our opponents back to their hands. Which, of course, again, keep in mind with this does not specify non-land permanent, so we can bounce our opponent's lands as well. And when you bounce every single one of your opponent's lands, well, that is basically game over for all of them. So yeah, this card can be incredible in a lot of situations, and yeah, it is definitely, in my opinion, the Golden Pig of this deck. Next up, though, let's talk about some ways to protect our commander with cards like Swiftfoot Boots and Nurok Stealth Suit. Swiftfoot Boots is going to give Urza Hexproof and Haste, and Nurok Stealth Suit is going to give our commander Shroud, and we can also attach it at instant speed for blue. So of course, each of these can be helpful in a lot of situations, and again with our commander, they have that fantastic cost reduction. Speaking of which, we also have some spells that can be reduced as well, with Negate, which is going to counter-target non-creature spell, Unwind, which can counter-target non-creature spell when untapped to 3 lands, and Rewind, which counters any spell untapped up to 4. Keep in mind, we basically net mana by doing this with Unwind and Rewind, because again, our commander reduces their cost by 1 each. But aside from throwing some wrenches into our opponent's plans, how do we finish them off? Outside of Temporal Fissure. First up, there's a Fishing Instruction, which says whenever you cast an artifact spell, create a 1/1 color stop your artifact creature token with flying. Again, we're going to be casting and recasting a ton of artifacts throughout the game, so this can make us a massive army in absolutely no time. Speaking of a massive army, well, there's Digsite Engineer, which says whenever you cast an artifact spell, you may pay 2. If you do, create a 0/0 colors constructed artifact creature token with this creature gets +1 for each artifact you control. So not only can this make us a massive amount of tokens, it can make those tokens, which are absolutely massive. And speaking of massive, well, there's the Antiquities War, which says look at the top 5 cards of your library. You may reveal an artifact card from among them, put in your hand, then put the rest of your library in a random order. And that is for lower counters 1 and 2. But for the third one, artifacts you control become artifact creatures with base power and count as 5/5 until end of turn. So that is an incredible finishing move for us. Speaking of which, we can overload Rise and Shine to make all of our non-artifact creatures that are 0/0s with 4 counters on them. So yeah, basically 4 4s. Good luck, opponents. And especially good luck if we get Psychosis Crawler out, a star, which power and toughness are each equal to the number of cards in our hand, so this can become massive, but more importantly, whenever you draw a card, each opponent loses 1 life. And again, we can draw an absurd amount of cards in a turn, so goodbye, opponents. But now that we've talked about every single non-land card, let's move on to the lands. First up, there's Command Tower, which can tap for either of our colors, and Exotic Orchard, which can do so most of the time, and then there's Ash Barrens, which does basic land cycling for 1. Next up, we've got Evolving Wilds and Temporary Expanse, both of which can be tapped and sacrificed to get a basic land to play tapped, and Mirror Landscape, which can actually ramp us. And then we've got Broker's Hideout and Obscura Storefront, each of which can be sacrificed when they come into play to get us one of our basics into play tapped, and we gain 1 life, and then Zhalfirin Void, when it enters the battlefield, we scry 1 to contemporary colors. Next up, there's Buried Ruin, which can be sacrificed to get an artifact from our graveyard back to our hand, and Prairie Stream and Port Town, which can each tap for either of our colors, and can enter the battlefield untapped when we meet a certain condition. And finally, we're going to round this deck out with basic lands, including plains and islands. And now that we've talked about every single card in this deck, let's talk about the price. Like I mentioned at the beginning of this episode, Urza is around $24, so its cost actually makes up about half of the cost of the deck, with the rest of the deck being incredibly budget-friendly, less than $1. Still, overall, the estimated cost is just $52.03, even taking into account Urza. And actually, that estimated cost does include basic lands at 10 cents a piece, so if you already have those basics, there's some extra savings for you there. And speaking of potential extra savings, you might be able to save even more by buying this deck on TCG Player and utilizing heavily played and damage cards, which of course need a home too. Though also keep in mind this estimated cost does not include the cost of shipping, which might vary depending upon where you live. And with that, the show is coming to a close, so it's my turn here from you. So in the comments below, let me know your thoughts on this episode are, and as always, thanks again and have a good one. This show and episodes like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. If you're looking for an easy way to help support this show, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Also, hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. We also have a ton of brand new t-shirt designs in stock, so make sure you check out those as well. Another easy way to support this show is with our TCG Player affiliate links. So whether you're buying a deck or individual cards, you can use this general link right here or one in the description. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all of their support.